Matthew Ehret, a revisit to the island of Koh Samui. It is an absolute pleasure to have you here again. We had a wonderful interview the last time, which is on my channel, Awakening in Health, about, I guess, the corruption of art from the origins of the Frankfurt School. And I really knew superficially about a lot of that stuff. And the chat we had really opened my mind to, I guess, how these people who we might consider might be the oligarchs or the families that are running the world, how they've covered so many different parts of controlling the narrative, but also controlling our subconscious. And we've got some big moves happening in Canada with the new presidential area with Carney being at the helm. And I reckon that there is some kind of link up between maybe things that happened prior to the Frankfurt School, up to the Frankfurt School, to what we see happening now. And if anybody could address that link up, kind of where it came from, we had a really interesting discussion about, for example, cybernetics and the role that that played in relation to the Tavistock Institute. So first of all, I want to welcome you. I want to say it's such a pleasure to have you back. And I want to get straight into the deep conversation with you.
Yeah, man, no, absolutely. And I remember this is almost a year's anniversary since that conversation here in Thailand. And I think the way you set it up is really, really good. And I think it's you've planted the seeds for some really interesting idea content and gestalts to grow very organically. But you're right, there's a lot of very ugly things, ugly ideas that have been put into motion, which could not have succeeded to the extent that they have at this moment in world history, had it not been, to a certain degree, through the consent of those who have been governed by the system that they were born into. It's not all our fault that we have this unjust, messed up system, but to a certain degree, the system requires consent for it to be successful in achieving the evil ends, whether it's through regime change, wars, enslavement, the abrogation of freedoms that it has. So I think you're right. The idea of the aesthetical, the loss of the ability to judge beauty and ugliness, its inverse, was a precondition for getting us to cloud our minds sufficiently that we would allow for these ugly ideas to manifest today.
So I'd love to do a quick recap, but just to add that if somebody looks up Matt Ehret, Awakening Health, Dennis O'Connor, you'll find that conversation on YouTube, and it's very likely that I'll edit the link into this conversation as well as a prelude to this discussion. But just to kind of recap, I remember that conversation fairly well because I was so intrigued by it. But did you want to kind of give a soft recap and then link those dots together for us?
Yeah, from what I can recall, and I haven't really visited that video since we originally did that on a near beachfront area. I think the gist was the Frankfurt School is an extremely important cult that emerged after World War I, which a lot of people today are not. They if they're watching your video, they certainly know the destructiveness of the woke ideology, but they don't often know what, or they haven't done the work to understand what is the underlying philosophical foundation out of which something as absurd as wokeism could have emerged, to the extent that it was even allowed to infiltrate and take over broad academia, education, and cultural policy more broadly, right? So the Frankfurt School is the place to go.
Okay, so what I'm going to do, hopefully, and I won't interrupt you too much, but no. I'm probably going to have to make you dumb it down for me, okay?
Yeah.
So from what I understand is the Tavistock Institute was probably a really pivotal point where all these kind of ideas got thrown on what has evolved into, I guess, the woke modern way of thinking, or would correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah, no, I would say that you're correct. And for those who don't know, I think both the Tavistock Institute and the Frankfurt School both emerged at around the same period in world history, really at the wake of World War I, which was such an absurdly destructive war that had no reason. Even today, when you look to scholars and professionals of history who you would think would be positioned very well to know what the reason for things were that happened in our past, you will not be able to find a good reason why World War I happened. It's, somebody says some archduke got shot by a terrorist member of the Black Hand in Serbia, and all of a sudden, the Archduke of some Austro-Hungarian, you know, zone of influence gets shot, and now everybody's killing everybody for 4 years. That makes no sense. So it's only when you take a conspiratorial and I would say truthful analysis of history that you could see that the seeds of that war were actually being planted in the 1890s, in the 1880s even. And the idea was always to get a certain Trump, like there's an idea of shock therapy, to get a psycho-spiritual shock into the system of humanity, to break people of their optimism of being human, which is a natural, you look at the child is naturally optimistic. It has no arrogance. The child is trusting of those who are adults, right? And they are emulating those who they give their trust to, and they learn very fast creatively. They try things. They're not afraid to make errors, and that's the human way. However, when you're in unnatural systems of empire, that attribute gets broken very early on. So the World War I thing was designed to break that out of humanity and create a culture that would be conducive of embracing pessimism and reject all of the traditions, the moral, the family traditions, the religious traditions that gave rise to the best of Western civilization. And the war was a great way of just creating a meat grinder of young, impressionable, 18-year-olds to 30-year-olds who were at the prime of their life, seeing horrors that no human should ever see. And at the wake of that, not only did you have a political solution to those very same arsonists who organized the war to begin with by creating secret alliances, not dissimilar from the sorts of things we see today, that got great powers to go and just fight each other unnecessarily, because again, secret military alliances are what they are. But then also in the wake of it was, world government, a eugenics-based globalist scientific elite that would manage the League of Nations, that would manage Chatham House, that would manage the entire New World Order, and Tavistock, just to wrap it up, and the Frankfurt School both grew out of that process, but as solutions, as ways to reorganize the entire human culture and human psyche around the new type of man and woman that they wanted to, and other things that they wanted to bring into being after this shock.
So from my perspective about what I see going on, I think we're in the middle of a World War III. And it's a war. It's a kind of a silent war if you put aside the actual wars like the Ukraine and Congo and all these other things going on. And correct me if I'm wrong, but I think you're probably saying something that many of us think, including me, that there seems to be some sort of spiritual battle between what we're divinely destined to be and what, call them the 13 families, I don't know, call them the oligarchs, what they don't want us to be. So are you suggesting that this is maybe a very long historical thing that's been in place, maybe for centuries for all now, but in that late 1800s kind of time period, there was a very orchestrated attack to, I guess, almost shake up our divinity or destroy our divinity, destroy our innocence, destroy our optimism. And it's kind of I guess, some sort of an attack on who we are as humans.
Well said. Yeah, no, I think that would be a proper way of characterizing it. I mean, it's not to say that this intention wasn't always a present, unbroken thing that was always impressing itself behind the scenes onto the human system. But that was, as we call them, a pregnant moment, a moment of action, right? Sometimes you have like a stick that you can bend, and it seems like every moment mathematically that you're counting 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 arithmetically is the same, but it's not the same because the tension buildup is being asymptotically increased in that moment that you'll feature a snap. And that shock front, that snap, they happen occasionally, but when they happen, they are what I think of as pregnant moments in history that are periods of crisis that could result in a much greater potential for positive or negative change. But everything that was formerly held to be normal, that was keeping us back from actualizing our potential, are thrown out. Now, that doesn't mean we're going to get something better. Sometimes we get a dark age. However, those are the moments where action really takes place, and that end of the 19th century period was certainly one of those.
And we see that when you look at the experiments on consciousness, especially with quantum random computer generators, for example, in and around 9/11, we know that there are these big world events that literally change you might call it ether, you might call it consciousness, and you'd probably, I think you're alluding to the fact that World War One was one, World War Two, COVID. Wow, that was, I mean, that shook the world consciousness, didn't it? So I want to try and pull you back to the Tavistock, I guess the evolution of the Tavistock Institute, and we talked about cybernetics, and I really superficially knew about that, and we had a discussion the other night about that, and I didn't have any kind of understanding about how significant that was. So first of all, could you maybe remind me for a start, and then maybe just explain to some people who've never heard of this why that was significant?
That's a layered but a good question. I think the Tavistock Institute, as you've alluded to, is probably one of the more important institutional forces shaping or misshaping so much of our history. I mentioned that they were created after World War I. It was specifically 1921 that you had the Tavistock Clinic created. The Tavistock Institute was created a little bit after World War II, I think 1947. But the clinic itself was 21. And the idea of the clinic originally being set up within, I think its headquarters was the town of Bedford, which is the town, a little district in England, which has been the family possession of the Russell family for many, many generations. Lord John Russell was a key figure within the British Empire. Bertrand Russell.
I was going to say, is Bertrand in the mix with the Russell name? Yeah.
Yep.
Okay.
So the Bedford family managed the town of Bedford. That is the headquarter of where the Tavistock Clinic was created, as I would say, a branch of British intelligence, military intelligence, that was designed originally to look at the effects of shock on those troops that had suffered psychologically during World War I. And all of a sudden, the idea was they had all of a sudden a massive array of guinea pigs, human guinea pigs, that they would normally never experience in one shot to examine. That's one of the nasty benefits of a war for a sick sociopathic psychiatrist. And so they were observing certain things amongst these human guinea pigs, one of which was a greater degree of susceptibility to, or malleability, a loss of confidence in one's own power of judgment, having gone through trauma of that sort. A tendency that when these people had received contradictory messaging or orders to either fight or retreat, which many did, they lost over time their ability to form judgments. There was a suggestibility factor that increased drastically, and also a compartmentalization factor within the psyche that would also accompany people who had trauma, who couldn't live with the memory of what they'd experienced in World War I. And so they would compartmentalize a lot of those memories. And although I would say that a lot of this had been observed by social engineers in centuries prior, probably millennia prior, that was the time that they had a more sort of scientific approach, I guess you could say, to what to do with this data as far as applying it to management of human systems in times of peace.
And it really makes me think, that's why I really enjoy our conversations, because you trigger health stuff. And obviously there's a big health link up to what I do. But we've got a lot of very solid experiments about something called epigenetics. And we know that generational trauma is passed down through further subsequent generations. So when I hear you kind of talk about these things, I kind of, first of all, have these ideas of MK Ultra, for example, the kind of foundation of those kind of programs. But then also the fact that I think these people who are instituting these programs, they're aware of this genetic lineage whereby these traumas do activate, or they do express themselves much, much, much later. And I think they're aware of that. And I would nearly go as far, I will go as far as to say that World War I, as an example, we would be seeing the epigenetic effects of that today, and probably for further future generations, if we don't look at these things and if we don't address them. So I've gone off on a tangent there, but I just felt that was important to make a note of. But please get back on track with where you were going there.
It's an important idea, right? Because it's like, how can we become self-aware of the effects of our unresolved baggage on future generations of those unborn? Like, we have a responsibility on so many levels to the unborn children that will come after us.
Beautifully put. Right? Absolutely, yeah.
So by being self-aware that epigenetics is a real thing, and if we run away from our demons and we don't tackle them head on, then we are going to be giving that as heirlooms for future generations to deal with and to ruin their lives around, right? If they don't, until somebody actually has the strength to look at themselves and self-examine and deal with it. So I think it's a great idea. It's a great point to throw out there.
Yeah.
And probably one which scares the hell out of the oligarchy, because I think that this financier oligarchy knows that if people become self-examining, self-aware beings that intervene onto their own darkness in order to bring light to themselves, then if we learn how to do that, we will be much less inclined to fall prey to the types of traps that they set for us. So of course they don't want that. But now you brought up two things. You brought up cybernetics, and you brought up Tavistock, and I think there's multiple points of glue that tie these two important things together. But a good jump on point is this Bertrand Russell clan dimension.
So remind me a bit more about Bertrand. He was a very, very important, influential person, wasn't he?
Super important and influential. I only encountered him, honestly. I thought of him while I was in university. I guess I encountered his name, as many probably did if you studied any philosophy class or even mathematics class. As a peacemaker, a philosopher of Western civilization, somebody who won the Nobel Prize for literature and possibly peace, but that's what he was known for, as a reputation, anti-war activist. But then when you actually begin to look more into who he was as a person and what he did and what he created and what he devoted his life to, a very different, darker picture from the popular brand emerges. One of those things is that he was one of the earliest, loudest advocates of dropping a nuclear bomb onto the Soviet Union in 1946.
Really?
Yeah. He was writing in the Journal of Atomic Scientists and other journals saying that now is the time for world government to get the Soviet Union to submit to a one world entity.
New World Order type of narrative from back that far with Russell, hey?
Well, he was even going on further, but the fact that he was calling for the nuking and the murder of millions of innocent civilians in order to achieve this great good that he had in his mind of a one world government, that was disturbing. But I think more importantly, he was an affiliate with the Tavistock Clinic on multiple points. He had many friends, William Sargent, many Tavistockian psychiatrists, let alone the fact that his very family was the setting, or the family township was the setting for Tavistock itself, which is, by the way, also where Hitler and Rudolf Hess were both located in 1911 and 1912
in Bedford,
for a full year, right next to the town of Bedford.
Bedford being where?
In England.
Really? Yeah. English Bedford, Hitler, and who else did you say? Sorry?
Yeah, and there was a Rudolf Hess, his second in command.
There you go.
And they only discovered this in 1947 when some watercolor paintings of Hitler, before he decided to go into politics disastrously, when he did some watercolor paintings, were discovered in a vault and they were sold at auction. There was a self-portrait of Hitler sitting on a very peculiar stone bridge. And it's like no other bridge you will ever see in this world. And he was sitting on it with a what looks to be almost like a little river of blood below him, no face, sitting solemnly. It's not a badly done watercolor painting overall. And somebody along the way observed that bridge looks exactly like this other bridge right next to Bedford, which, when you look at photographs, it is stone for stone the same bridge that he was in. And this was done in around 1911, 1912.
So you say that the picture had no face. How do we know it was Hitler? So I've got to be devil's advocate with some of the stuff here, man.
Sure. I think that he did a number of self-portraits that all had the same sort of quality of looking for himself.
So it was like a motif of sorts that he
yeah. Now
expressed.
One could say you can't say 100% that it was him, but it was done by him.
Yeah.
And it was found with a whole swath of his own portrait. So the fact that he did it, and let's say there was another guy who looked kind of like him with similar physique sitting on that same bridge, it means still that he was sitting at that same location in that area, painting somebody else at that bridge. It doesn't remove him from that location at that time.
Yeah.
Indicating that even before Tavistock Clinic was created, there was already something there engaged in some form of psychiatric manipulation of high-placed individuals that would service empire later on.
That's incredible. That blows me away.
Yeah, and Uwe Alschner is a friend of ours, and he did the most remarkable work on backing up that thesis, and he's got a beautiful article that he's written online. Now, I'm saying all this just to get across that Bertrand Russell was also the founder of the thing that we could call cybernetics in many ways, though the credit is often given to his student, Norbert Wiener, who was a young mathematical prodigy who studied in Cambridge under Russell when he had, in 1913. Russell had just published volume 3 of his 3-volume Principia Mathematica. And Russell had, with Whitehead, his co-author, attempted a mission, which was to try to codify all of known and what could in the future be knowable scientific thoughts into a construct of a closed system that would be grounded by an absolutely finite array of axioms, and with the idea or the thesis that good science that would be peer reviewed or respected in society had to adopt the method that would be extolled by him and Alfred North Whitehead and in the Principia, and would have to be mathematically descriptive in nature, could not go outside of the fixed axioms, and as such would cage science and discovery into this very closed model.
I'm going to have to paraphrase because I'm trying to keep up with you here. So the Principia Mathematica, that's a term I've heard before from, remind me, was it from some philosopher? Where did that term come from?
Isaac Newton.
Isaac Newton, that's right. So Russell wrote a book with the same name, the same title, and this book, it sounds like, or the idea sounds like having an absolute answer for absolutely everything. And if you had that absolute answer for absolutely everything, you could potentially predict every single situation possible and every outcome attached to it. Would that be another way of saying that?
Yeah, you would be God. You would have the omniscience of God to be able to extrapolate every single thing that could ever possibly happen, and that you could reverse extrapolate everything that has ever happened into some imaginary Big Bang moment that you imagined existed, and at some future heat death, which everything ceases to be. You could do that as effectively a human God.
So am I right? And I'm kind of cheating a little bit here because I had this discussion with you the other night, and it was really good food for thought. So would I be right then in saying that if you set the rules and set the rules very specifically, and you exclude other rules, let's say the ether, let's say consciousness, you have a sound or a solid proposal that really traps your thinking within this box and excludes other forms of thinking?
Yeah.
And so I'll just leave that question there.
Yeah, no, exactly. Like if reality contains principles that are not located within the domain of non-living mathematical descriptive physics, but you say that the only language that you're allowed to use to describe all of reality, conscious, living life, everything, is to be bounded by concepts that are fundamentally rooted in non-living mathematical, physical descriptive terms, then you are going to do a great job at creating like a polarization filter of the mind that will only allow a very small sliver of reality into, or evidence into, the mind of the scientific practitioner without them even realizing it, that by just them having adopted those polarizing filters, and then like a polarizing, sunglasses, the entire rest of this massive spectrum of reality will be assumed not to even exist, at which point no discoveries could really be made, even by honest-minded people who wouldn't know better.
So is this a suitable analogy where as students or children going to school, you have your exam, and your exam has your question, and the answers to the question are given to you in the form of a tick box, and you have A, B, C, and D.
Yeah.
And some children are sitting in a classroom going, hang on a second, I think there's more than A, B, C, and D here.
Yeah.
How about if, and they get failed because they put forward the thesis of if outside of the A, B, C, and D. Is that too simple an analogy? Or
that's a perfect analogy.
Okay.
That's exactly it.
Okay. So this really, and I mentioned this when we were talking the other night, starts to get a little bit sinister, doesn't it? Because one of the observations that I've made when we certainly look at Newton, and especially when we think about health, there is this fixed paradigm of health that we're given, that everything is structured, everything is centered on atoms and molecules. This interacts with this interacts with this, and there is no other way of looking at it, which suits the pharmaceutical industry absolutely perfectly, but it totally fails to take into account things, for example, like the placebo effect, which I'm very, very passionate about trying to inform people about in order to be able to take control of their health. This I guess, genesis of a mechanical view of the world with nothing else outside. Would that be another way of?
Yeah, we have a friend in here, Pat's girlfriend,
Era, yeah.
She's got an incredible experience where, as somebody who is a very creative yoga teacher,
I'm going to shout out to the Green Light Cafe, Pat from the Critical Thinkers group, incredible person who actually was responsible for us connecting. And if you want to learn salsa in Samui, you got to look up Green Light Cafe in Samui. And you also meet some cool people like Matt. I'd like to chip myself in that conversation, but I'll defer to some modesty at this moment in time. But yeah, sorry to jump across.
No,
you
and
there.
you're an absolute pleasure. I mean, what your mind has been able to figure out and just wire itself to in terms of just the science of health and how the body heals itself is just impeccable.
Thank you so much.
And I'm in awe just sitting back and throwing a question at you that might seem like a simple question, a stupid question, and I discovered very quickly that you're a paradigm buster, and it's enjoyable just hearing you riff.
You gave me I remember a comment you threw at me last time we met, just before we kind of got to know each other a bit better. Something along the lines of, I heard you say a lot of stuff and I just thought it was absolutely outlandish and unbelievable. And after a while, I started catching on that you may be able to back it up with some information.
Yeah, that's exactly.
And I took that as a fantastic compliment. I wasn't in any way offended. So I really appreciate you, saying that. Thank you very much.
Yeah, dude. Well, and back to the point of Ira as well, who's somebody who I've had the pleasure of doing a bit of yoga with, and just getting to talk to her. She's given me a case study of somebody who is still in her 30s, has been working with her now for a couple of years, came to her on the verge of death, liver breakdown. The medical system had cut up her large intestines. This woman had no intestines, had a poop bag, still does, lifelong thing now. None of that needed to happen, and she was at the end of her rope, and she was beginning to really mentally realize that she had to break free and look for alternative approaches to health. And this is where she got into yoga and discovered Ehret specifically, who she'd been working with now for a few years. And I spoke to this woman. She has at this point completely recovered. She can do the most elaborate advanced yoga stands one-handed on a rock. She is now, her liver is completely healthy. I mean, the scientific community had given her up to 40 drugs, some of which were running against each other, running damage on her organs. Her liver was dead. Now it's all back to health. It's like nothing had ever happened to her. And her reputation has circulated beyond anything imaginable. And she gets phone calls now from doctors in Canada. She's from Canada, asking her advice on what to do and what they should tell their patients who have digestive issues and liver issues. So it's incredible that the body can literally, with the right attitude, the right mindset, and the right rigor,
this is incredibly important, and it really relates back to where the conversation started from. That the knowledge of that there's far more outside the paradigm that we're being given is very, very, very important, because we're talking about belief.
Yeah.
And belief, we are tapping into different energy systems. And at this stage, especially after the last few years with COVID, that for us to be sitting in our power, to be able to connect into these belief systems of healing, of wisdom, of goodness, of generosity, of power, of strength, of masculinity, of femininity, this is what they don't want. Because if we can tap into those, we have a cohesiveness in society. And if we're blocked from tapping into those, we have a fractured society. And a fractured society is absolutely so much easier to control. Yeah. And back to a lovely segue back to where
cybernetics,
absolutely,
and Tavistock. Yeah, no, I think that plays in wonderfully, because the as above, so as below, right? As the whole, so as the part. You should be able to see some truth of the system of the body of humanity as a whole, by looking at the body of the individual, the family unit,
beautiful tie-in.
And I think you're right. Like, to the degree that they can compartmentalize our minds to the universe outside of us, as well as at the same time the universe inside of us, health science, as well as the broader physics and biology that we are born into, that we are a part of. We're not outside of, but we are part of. To the degree that they can do that, there is an absolute limit on how much potential creativity and thus uncontrollability is going to be baked into the system. Which is, I mean, you're dealing with a society that still to this very day has been run by or influenced by a closed system oligarchy that, in a Freudian form of projection, imposes their own misanthropy onto the system that they wish to control. So with cybernetics, Bertrand Russell was an absolute. If you read his writings, his views on humanity, his views of the universe, he is the most cynical, pessimistic, dark bastard you'll ever.
Wow. And I'm kind of fortunate now, I think. I've got his books earmarked to look through, but I've got so many other things I want to look at. I haven't got there.
And you'll find
but hearing you say that really makes me think.
But people listening to this, some people might really like Bertrand Russell, and they'll say, oh, but I've read this thing or that thing where he talks about how we should all love each other. Yeah, well, try looking for those other things where he talks about his own personal view of what love means and what human beings are, and you'll balance it out.
Okay,
and
tell us that.
Genuine.
Give me an idea.
Well, for example, he writes in his 1903 on freedom. He writes an essay where he describes that it is only through embracing entropy, the second law of thermodynamics, and the inevitability of the death of all of creation, that we can begin to find the warmth and meaning or meaninglessness of being human in the unyielding embrace of despair.
So we're almost going back now to the Frankfurt School, aren't we?
It's almost a paraphrase. That's the philosophy of George Lukács, of Theodor Adorno, and their ultimate view of human nature and creation as a whole is one of pure hypocritical cynicism, darkness.
So here's my question: was this a kind of I'm lost for the word here? Organic? Was this an organic growth from, let's say, Russell towards the Frankfurt School, or was this a cynical plan to trap us in this closed box system? And that's an opinion question, obviously, or maybe it's not. Maybe there's a firm answer to that.
Well, I think that the spread of general optimism was so unboundedly positive. The idea that human beings could always leap outside of our limits to growth, that we could always make more discoveries, make things more beautiful, make things better for our children and grandchildren. That spirit, which really found fertile soil in the American Republic's young experience as a young, problematic, troubled nation, but a nation that was still founded upon this ethos.
It's almost like an innocent beauty, isn't it?
It was,
a naivety in some ways. Yeah.
But there was a battle inside of America that you and I have talked about, between different factions. But the thing that gave it all vitality and meaning was this higher idea of natural law, that we're all made in the image of a living, loving, reasonable creator, and that we have to act accordingly. And that when we do, empire will lose its grip, freedom increases, sovereignty increases, and that began to spread to Russia. After the U.S. Civil War, that saw an embrace of admirers of Abraham Lincoln in Russia, that it started adopting this American system of political economy. Saw it with Meiji Restoration, where American system leaders associated with Lincoln were advising the Meiji government with Otto von Bismarck's Germany, who, by the way, it was his having been expelled, kicked out, his ouster, that the seeds for World War I finally became possible. And we're talking here 1891 that he got ousted through British intrigue within the courts around the Kaiser, that convinced this stupid Kaiser, that Otto von Bismarck was making decisions outside of his will. And Bismarck, who was an admirer of Lincoln, somebody who fought against the British Empire and against the enmeshment into wars, when he was out, there was nobody to take his place, no leadership that was qualified. And all of a sudden, Germany began to make more and more missteps into traps that set the stage for what became World War I when it was sparked. But it was all over the world, this spread of this idea that a sovereign nation is made of sovereign people who, to be sovereign as individuals, you have to have a culture that enhances our aesthetical appreciations of truth and beauty as parts of the same thing, and ugliness and lies as its opposite. And that type of society could endure, but had to be cultivated in order to have a world of cooperation with sovereign states made of sovereign people collaborating for the future. And that's been the formula that the oligarchy has been striving to destroy forever.
Okay, so I don't want to miss the cybernetics thing, because there were some important points there. If you could sum up cybernetics kind of succinctly.
Okay.
And again, for me as well, but I'm sure there's people out there.
It's hovering since the beginning. I know.
Yeah. So I want to sum up that, and then I'm really interested for us to jump towards the conversation we had last time, and I want to link that up to what we see happening in Canada. Yeah. So I'm aware that you got interviews coming up a little bit later on today. So this is why I've sat you down, because I want to discover this stuff.
Yeah. Okay, so cybernetics came out. It's essentially, if somebody were to ask you what is it, the answer would be it's the science of control. It's a practical science of controlling any system, and it's a way of looking at all systems. So just like a cell is a system, it's got many moving parts within the system. A solar system is a system. There's a nervous system, right? There's a thing that has a purpose, a role to play, and many parts within it that service that purpose.
And there's a suggestion of infallibility about it, isn't there? That we have all the parts of it worked out, and there's nothing else to see.
Right. So in the cybernetics, because it's that truth that everything can be conceptualized as a system with parts and a whole, but the whole is also a part of a broader system, right? That's a truth, and that each thing has a purpose that's part of something bigger and smaller. What method do we allow our minds to use to understand how to evaluate and think about those systems that we are also part of a system and are systems within systems, right? Cybernetics was an answer to that question. It was a wrong answer, and it was designed to be a wrong answer, but that's the point. So what it is today, and as it's taught and practiced, is based on the idea that you could take, especially it began with human departments, human institutions, NATO, the OECD, the Organization for Economic Culture, Cooperation and Development, the World Bank, the IMF, departments of education, different departments of various governments began to be reorganized after World War II around this idea that only a small nervous system, a small nerve center of executives were required or were allowed to have the ability to see what the whole was that they were privy to managing, with feedback loops, so that all parts of the system, all of the subdepartments within a system that would be managed by an executive class of inner elite, of initiates, would be managed around the concepts of Norbert Wiener. Norbert Wiener was the nominal founder of this thing, that he was working, I think, for the U.S. Air Force in World War II, and one of his mandates was to practically come up with a solution for detecting when oncoming enemy aircraft was coming your way, for gunners to discern where they had to aim and fire, which would be ahead of the aircraft. So you had to be able to calculate with radar where and what position and velocity a missile or an aircraft was coming at you, get that data, process and calculate as quickly as possible where that aircraft was going to be to point your gun to that proper location, right?
So there's real practical, solid applications to this. There's no disputing. It has value.
It has
but
practical value.
It's a trap.
You just don't want to make it out to be more than what it is.
So,
and the problem is it became a religion. So what they started doing after World War II is that Norbert Wiener, who was again a student of Bertrand Russell, and what his life's mission had been after he was part of the Bertrand Russell Young Boys Network in Cambridge, was to take the Principia Mathematica and find a practical application for that, which is what Bertrand Russell challenged his young boys to figure out as they grew in their careers. And again, what he began immediately interfacing with, starting in 1946, was the Josiah Macy Foundation, which was a eugenics foundation working closely with the Rockefellers and funding the science of racial purification and population control before and during World War II. And the Josiah Macy Foundation began a series over the course of 6 years known as the Josiah Macy Foundation Conferences on Cybernetics, that brought in Tavistockian psychiatrists in London's Tavistock Clinic, and officials who became soon thereafter leading handlers of MK Ultra, including Gregory Bateson, a leading figure from the CIA psychiatry board that became an MK Ultra official with Sidney Gottlieb, Ewan Cameron, who was also running the Allen Memorial Institute. He was a Tavistockian, British-Canadian-based psychiatrist doing shock therapy to break down patients, as they call them, but they were actually guinea pigs, to break them down into a blank slate to rebuild them as human software from scratch. And there were many others. G. Brock Chisholm, who founded the World Health Organization was also an attendee. He was a Tavistockian psychiatrist, as was John Rawlings Rees, who was the president of Tavistock himself, and he was the founder and first president of the World Federation on Mental Health of 1946, working closely with Julian Huxley.
So this is when they were, sticking knitting needles into people's orbital cavities to mush up their frontal cortexes, with the idea that it brought down aggression, and these clients, patients, victims, whatever you want to call them, were cured of nasty mental health problems. When in actual fact, we know that these guys were massively damaged to the point of being vegetables afterwards. But the research papers that came out about this showed that this was a properly normal thing to do. So, but there's a couple of questions that I had along the way, and I hope this doesn't tangent us off too much. But this cybernetic closed fixed system, does this include, could love, something as abstract as love, be defined within that system? Or is something like love the kind of thing that they want to take us away from, that they don't like us exploring because it doesn't fit in the box? And the second little tangent off that would be the similarity that I can see in relation to having medicine partitioned into all these separate boxes, and ne'er the twain shall meet, which basically is perfect if you want to keep people sick.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, you're right. No, I mean, part of the idea of, okay, so part of the concept of cybernetics was to part of the idea of cybernetics was to break down and compartmentalize every system as much as possible into compartments and subcompartments around which no two departments would ever know what the other was doing. And originally, I think the first practical application of cybernetics in managing human systems was the Manhattan Project, America's first sort of official secret science program, where it was prolific, right? Like it involved billions of dollars, which in those days is like hundreds of billions of dollars of investment. And it was so secretive that no two departments in the same complex had scientists who knew what the other was doing. Everybody had a very micromanaged job to do, and only Oppenheimer, Leo Szilard, these misanthropic anti-humanists who are all also fans of world government, were permitted to look at the whole and see what all of the different departments and yeah, exactly. So when I think what you're saying is very true, what they did in the education system, which is why Sir Alexander King, who went on to create the Club of Rome, he was at the time in the late 50s when this was being done to the Organization of Economic Cooperation and Development, the OECD. He was applying this. That was his assignment there, and he was at the time the director of the scientific research director for the British Empire. He was the official scientist for the British Empire. There's another name that's similar to what I'm saying. And he did such a good job that he was knighted. And what they did with their focus on education first was to enforce these divides between math and physics, and from physics and biology, right? Life science to hard science to the mathematical description of it, the symbolic aspect of it, that were all divided up. Anthropology, as the human living science, would be divided even further. And then all of these things would be put under engineering, would be another practical branch, but that would be divided from the physicists. So you'd have the physicists arguing with the engineers. The engineers would then be arguing with the architects, which would be its own thing. And
the model of
all
medicine.
Of these,
it's the model of medicine.
Yeah. And then within their nutrition and medicine would be separated, but they would all be seen as then like more analytical domains, whereby then the arts, the music, the theater would be increasingly separated. Absolutely, the Geistes and the Naturwissenschaften would be broken up, in which these would be domains that would be pure emotions liberated from the tyranny of reason, the tyranny of logic that prevents good art from expressing ourselves. Now, the problem is that you began to worship in the domain of the arts irrationalism, effectively ugliness, because the new philosophy of the Frankfurt School that was also being introduced in this artificial construct was one of cynicism. That art, they said, must only be encouraged or funded by governments, which is where increasingly artists found their only domain of funding increasingly was under the National Film Board of England or the BBC or the National Film Board or other artistic boards, the art, of Canada or the Commonwealth. So you could only get funding if you adopted a philosophy that your art has to reflect the ugliness of the world. That if you tried to do beautiful art, you were a hypocrite and thus
You weren't
not
seeing the full picture.
you were not being an authentic artist. So you were being a fool and a liar to others and thus a bad artist. So to be a good artist
And a bad human almost by default.
By default, to try to be and aspire to goodness and ideals made you a bad person, to be looked down upon and not funded. Whereas to be somebody who could embrace the ugliness of reality of human beings and express that in your art, well, that all of a sudden made you somebody who's going to get money, who's going to get bids all of a sudden coming at you from Rockefellers and Mellon
gives
family.
You a status all of a sudden.
Yeah,
and then the people trying to do the right thing, all of a sudden are poor and they don't have any energy behind them, and they then have to aspire to these ideals. So it's a very beautiful system to perpetuate. To I guess tie into our base chakras of greed, of lower vibrations. So okay. I'm starting to see a jigsaw puzzle just kind of start dropping into place here. So this slow erosion of I guess our more beautiful parts of our spirit. So we're compromising education. We're partitioning education. We're taking people away from seeing the bigger picture. We're indoctrinating them to believe that they will not be able to see the big picture. So they have to have a belief in a hierarchy or a system or a person higher than them. In other words, the oligarch or the governor of the World Health Organization, whoever that person might be, given to you at a very, very young age, and then you're endorsing or you're promoting the people who are disrupting all these harmonious parts of society. So the natural goodness in people is being kind of subverted by these different kind of I guess reward systems. Is that
I think you're and I saw that what you're saying is something that, for those who have been in fine arts, and I spent some years in fine arts in university, I saw that within my colleagues, other students, and I saw that within myself to a certain degree, where I thought you start thinking that there's something wrong with you. Like I went into the arts because I had things that I wanted to communicate. I wanted to make documentaries. I myself saw it where I went into the arts in order to communicate my ideas, my ideals, to make documentaries. And what I found was that I couldn't pass my tests. I couldn't excel if I didn't deconstruct my thoughts, become increasingly unintelligible, and what I identified was effectively ugly, to accommodate the aesthetics of the teachers who were of the view that good art must only be considered good art when is that going to be catch up? That good art should only be considered good art when you make your audience squirm uncomfortably in their chairs. If you do anything other than that, it is bad art. So what you're saying is absolutely true, and there was almost a self-organizing decay that was built into the system when you can create a false market. If you want to become a member of the inner clubs within the power structures of the empire today, well, part of the things that they get nouveau riche to do is they bid on exorbitantly expensive, ugly, abstract art that was literally cooked up in 2 seconds. And by the very act of bidding upon and purchasing said art, it creates a false impression of a demand that then other artists who are starving feel that they need to emulate in order to also make a living. So you're totally right that becomes a self-defeating thing. And it is tied very much into the cybernetics perversion as a whole.
Okay, so we've got to the kind of Frankfurt School, and in that evolution of Frankfurt School, which arguably blossomed in around the 50s to the 70s, maybe.
Yeah.
And then we seem to have this very big pull towards what I would describe as the woke movement. And there seems to be some areas that are very more severely affected by that. New Zealand, Canada would be one. So there seems to have been a dramatic change in culture that, and I use this word loosely, normal people recognize, but the whole system is set up to be that if you recognize that as something that is anti-human or that goes against societal norms, you're made out to be the one that is abnormal. And where I'm going with this is to tie in this place where we've got to with the Frankfurt School to, I guess, the horrendous things that I see happening in Western countries, especially your Commonwealth countries.
Yeah, our Commonwealth countries
Oh,
in some
yes,
ways, right?
yes, yeah.
Yeah, well, I think that the entire woke agenda really, as we've been dancing around it, it is entirely driven by political correctness, cultural relativism, the idea that there is no truth, because the idea is, well, truth is something that is only the emanation of people's individual perceptions. Since every individual has very different perceptions, thus there's infinite truths because there's infinite possible individuals, infinite possible feelings. And it's really that simplistic as a thesis, but they built an entire construct around that then started validating the idea that, okay, well, it is wrong to start to carry out the types of ambitions to end hunger or end empire by doing things that John F. Kennedy was trying to do, or Charles de Gaulle was trying to do, which was to offer advanced scientific and technological progress to abused countries that would no longer be allowed to. That's funny. That's really cute. That's adorable. All right.
Yeah. Sorry.
So we just okay. So the idea was that was Western male patriarchy imposing its will upon people who come from a different culture that don't value technological progress. So the idea of building hydroelectric dams or building advanced infrastructure or advanced forms of education in countries like Africa or South America or other countries that have been victimized by colonialization, well, that is simply imposing our Western patriarchy onto other people, which is unnatural, you see. And so what became done under followers of Sir Alexander King, the founder of the Club of Rome, the cyberneticist, which included people like Maurice Strong, a leading Canadian oligarch who played a big role in rewiring Canadian foreign aid in the 1960s, also played a role in positioning Pierre Elliott Trudeau, who also said that our entire government has to be organized around the principles of cybernetics in 1969.
Very interesting.
At a Harrison, at an Ontario conference of the Liberal Party.
And just to add to that, who was buddies with Carney, who essentially invented the climate change scam in London in '92, from memory.
That Maurice Strong.
The same Maurice Strong. So the irony there is you have a mining magnate who all of a sudden, one of the world's richest people, who all of a sudden decides they want to save the world with concepts about carbon dioxide.
Yeah.
People have got to start putting these pieces together that we're getting sold so many lies.
Yep. And so part of that was, like when he rewired the Department of External Affairs and created the Canadian International Development Agency in 1968, what he did is he brought in cybernetics and this whole Frankfurt School moral relativistic ideology, or at the time it was cultural relativism, saying that no, the only money that we give to poor countries can only be given to appropriate technologies which do not impact either the environments, the ecosystems, or the cultures that receive that money. They can build a windmill with the money we give them. They can build something that is going to facilitate our increased control over them, but they cannot build things that will help themselves.
So obviously this altruistic kind of saving the world kind of direction. I'm just wondering where your cobalt mines in the Congo fit in, where you got these mothers with these little children breathing these toxic fumes and dying at early ages. So obviously this it's such a beautiful altruistic pro-human movement behind these fucking pieces of scum. Sorry,
that's what they are.
Yeah. So I've kind of gone off on tangent.
It's disingenuous. It's disingenuous. It's dishonest. It proves the dishonesty of the whole thing, right? Because they have no problem destroying nature, destroying human lives, destroying
for the electric vehicles, and for the iPhones, and for whatever else. And we're all guilty. We're all guilty.
As long as it's happening in Black Africa.
Yeah.
And that's also part of the compartmentalization of the minds of the population that really received the full brunt of it. The baby boomers that grew up after 1945 and that were processed through the education system were increasingly mentally compromised and compartmentalized to not be able to properly understand how to think of how some place as far as Africa impacts their own lives. And that inability to see a whole and how they are a part of a whole made it more and more possible for these same entities to thrive and grow, that people like Maurice Strong and Peter Monk, uh, Barrett Gold, mining magnate from Canada, who worked with Strong, and also co-creating the 1001 Nature Trust with Prince Philip and Prince
So they're
Bernhard.
raping the world on the one hand, and
Yeah.
they're putting forward this idea of rewilding, beautification, and saving the world, and
bring the wolves
bring
back
the wolves,
to
bring
London,
the bears,
and
push everybody into
yeah.
20-minute cities. And so there's an absolute hypocrisy, and well, it's more sinister than hypocrisy. Isn't it?
Yeah, it's so bad.
It's much more sinister.
Yeah.
So to kind of, I guess, paraphrase the whole thing, you've got this evolution that kind of started from the late 1870s, involving World War I, which I guess the Tavistock Institute grew from, and then the Frankfurt School kind of came out of that, and you have some pivotal members who you can trace back very, very directly to that 1870 time, which include Trudeau's father, which includes Maurice Strong, who was buddies with Mark Carney, who now is at the helm of Canada. And most people don't even realize this sinister trajectory as to how he became, I guess, so influential, especially kind of aligning himself with Maurice Strong, to now being on this podium where he's replaced some absolute piece of filth in Trudeau. And he's kind of putting himself out there as the answer, the new answer to change Canada positively. Am I missing something here?
No, I think it's good. I mean, I won't say with any certainty to what degree they personally directly colluded or knew each other in person. I'm sure that they came to similar conferences.
There's an overlap, though.
There's
sure,
so much overlap. Like, Mark Carney is the clearest embodiment of the spirit of Maurice Strong that I know of anywhere in the world. He's somebody who, both of them were members of the Queen's Privy Council of Canada. Both of them are World Economic Forum trustees. Maurice Strong was a co-founder of the World Economic Forum. He was a mentor of Klaus Schwab. Mark Carney is a trustee, along with Chrystia Freeland, a Rhodes Scholar of the World Economic Forum. Both of them are Bilderberger Group steering committee members, Maurice Strong and Carney both, but at different times. Both of them are intellectually committed to a global Green New Deal, and both of them were engaged in promoting a globalized financier system to financialize the world system. Maurice Strong's case, while he was working with Power Corps, the World Bank later on, all of these mining cartels. Mark Carney, while he was working with Goldman Sachs as an investment banker and speculator, growing the derivatives time bomb. But both of them, while on the one hand contributing to being part of the problem, then were also part the whole entire time of the solution that was always baked into the crisis that they would initiate, which was a global green set of global civilization under this imaginary idea that I think you could see discussed in people like Theodore Adorno and other Frankfurt School leaders who believe that you could only create a new type of human being when all of mankind learns to embrace the despair and meaninglessness of creation, and completely thus is broken of all of their faith in any higher reality beyond themselves directly. And at that point, you can create in their sick minds a new type of human that's never existed in an aeon, a new age.
There's a strange sort of common sense behind that, isn't it? There's a certain logic that if you didn't, I guess, start digging around and doing your investigations, actually makes a weird kind of sense. And I guess that's why it's so compelling. And when the narrative is kind of thrown out there, unless you have a fair bit of critical thinking, you can really fall severely for that trap. And that's why I really enjoy the kind of work that you do, because you have that way of meticulously going through stuff that I could never look at. I wouldn't want to look at. I wouldn't want to dig into all those kind of things. And I think that's where I really enjoy, I guess, the journey that I'm on, because I know that people wouldn't want to look into the same health things that I look into. So again, just bouncing off you, you've got a reference for it. You've got the receipts. You can back it up. And you also are not afraid to be called on stuff as well. And we don't agree all the time. So it's always a little bit dangerous to be in a funnel or in an echo chamber together. But I mean, there's some. I just enjoy the chats with you. I enjoy that you take on the challenge, and again, you can back it up. To wrap it up, I think we've established that there is actually a very, very clear line from the Tavistock Institute to what's happening in Canada at the moment. And I want to if you can, give your projection about the more immediate future of Canada and possibly the slightly longer term projection.
Well, that could almost be an entire
Absolutely.
discussion unto itself.
Maybe we'll do a part two, and,
yeah.
we might do a lead up for it.
Yeah, that's a good idea. And what I would suggest is to take this tension of the ambiguity of my lack of an answer as an impetus for people watching to keep their minds tuned to episode 2, 3, and 4 of the What is the Dark Mission Behind Mark Carney video coming up.
Just to really harbor on that point, Matt, you're putting together a video documentary series about Carney in particular with a lot of this information behind it.
Yes, episode 1 is already released. Each one's going to be about 6 to 8 minutes, so they're all very short. CanadianPatriot.org or my Substack, MatthewEhret.substack.org.
Yep.
.com. Rising Tide Foundation will not be featuring that. We want to keep that a little bit less hardcore.
Yeah.
But likewise, Cynthia is working on some incredible documentaries as well, both on breaking free of the anti-China psyop that we're doing together and the Escaping Calypso's Island on why there are truly no limits to growth. So that's also on the Rising Tide Foundation. All of that stuff does work together in one tapestry.
Excellent. Matt, absolutely great talking to you every single time. I kind of almost get overwhelmed with that amount of information you spit out. So I'm glad you got patience with me to be able to pull you up and stop and to be able for me to get some kind of grasp on what you're saying. I want to chuck this video on my Awakening in Health channel. I've got a new Awakening in Health Instagram account. Please follow it. Get me on YouTube. I've got my Twitter back up and running, and I've got a little bit of help with a lot of my social media stuff now. So my time, I think, will be devoted a lot more to doing things like this, which I really, really enjoy doing. Thank you, anybody who's looking at this. I'm sure you'll have links and information possibly underneath this screen after it's edited. And I really look forward to bringing you some more great people and some more